Hi, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Monday, February 9th, 2025. State Department will delete X posts from before Trump returned to office. A sign for the State Department stands outside the Harry S. Truman Federal Building in Washington, D.C. on July 11th, 2025. The State Department is removing all posts on its public accounts on the social media platform X, made before President Trump returned to office on January 20th, 2025. The posts will be internally archived, but will no longer be on public view, the State Department confirmed to NPR. Staff members were told that anyone wanting to see older posts will have to file a Freedom of Information Act request. According to the State Department, employee who asked to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation by the Trump administration, that would differ from how the U.S. Department typically handles archiving the public online footprint of previous administrations. The move comes as the Trump administration has removed wide swaths of information from government websites that conflict with the president's views, including environmental and health data and references to women, people of color, and the members of the LGBTQ+ community. The government has also taken signs at the national park mentioning slavery and references to Trump's impeachment and presidency at the National Portrait Gallery. The White House has also launched a revisionist history account on the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol and has replaced the government's coronavirus resources, cited with a page titled "The Lab Leak: The True Origins of COVID-19." The removal of State Department X posts from public view appears to be less about ideological differences with past statements and more about control of future messaging. The directive will see the removal of posts from Trump's first term as well as those under then-President Joe Biden and Barack Obama. In response to NPR's question about the removals, an unnamed State Department spokesperson said the goal is to limit confusion on the U.S. government policy and to speak with one voice to advance the president, secretary, and the administration's goals and messaging. It will preserve history while promoting the present, the spokesperson said. The Department X accounts are one of the most powerful tools for advancing the America's First goals and messages of the President, Secretary, and Administration, both to our fellow American and audiences around the world. The State Department did not respond to NPR's specific question about whether content will also be removed from other social media sites or whether there will be ways for the public to access archived posts without filing a Freedom of Information Act request. All archived content will be preserved in alignment with Federal Record Act requirements and department policies, the spokesperson said. Some current and former State Department employees, as well as academics, worry that it will make the historical record of the government's communications and actions harder to trace. For all of the many challenges, certainly, that social media has introduced into politics, it has also created this level of an imperfect, but certainly some level of transparency, said Shannon McGregor, a professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who studies the role of social media in politics. Even if the X posts are still accessible and in some kind of archive, it still puts up a greater barrier in terms of having access to that information. In a similar but unrelated move this week, the CIA abruptly took down its World Factbook, a widely used reference manual to see an authoritative source of information about countries, their economies, and their demographics, and more. The CIA's announcement and the publication, which has been published since 1962, first went online in 1997, was being sunset and gave no further explanation for the decision. Accounts for embassies, ambassadors, bureaus affected. The State Department directive applies to all the department's active official X accounts, including accounts for the U.S. embassies and admissions ambassadors, the department bureaus and programs, according to the screenshots of internal guidance seen by NPR. The department has used its posts on X and other social media sites for years to share everything from policy announcements and speeches by the Secretary of State and ambassadors to fact sheets for travelers and images from around the world. These posts to be removed are not just press statements. They include our embassies, July 4 live streams, photos of COVID vaccine donations to other nations, holiday greetings, condolences, cultural programming, and the day-to-day record of diplomacy. The show who the U.S. engaged with, when and how often a public record of these moments. Orna Blum, a long-serving senior Foreign Service officer and public diplomacy specialist who retired last year, wrote in a LinkedIn post about the directive. Once removed, there will be no easy public searchable access to this history. The Freedom of Information Act is slow, discretionary, and often redacted. It's a backstop, not a substitute for open archives. Blum wrote, since Obama, the first president to use an official account on the social media site, then called Twitter, left office in January 2017, handing over online accounts has been part of the transition process between administrations. Some content is archived, but those records typically remain in public view. Federal agency accounts, including State Department and X, are passed along to the incoming administration intact, meaning that posts made under earlier administrations remain visible on their timelines. The State Department also has publicly available archived versions of its website under previous administrations, dating back to the President Bill Clinton. Some high-profile accounts, including those of the President, Vice President, First Lady, and White House, are handled differently. For example, the @POTUS handle on X is handed over from one president to the next with its existing roster of followers. But posts from the outgoing president are moved to a new archive, such as POTUS 44 for Obama, and POTUS 45 for the first Trump term, and POTUS 46 archive for Biden. The State Department guidance says that X removals do not apply to official accounts that are already dormant and marked as archived, like the Sec Pompeo account, used by Trump's first-term Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani recently faced similar questions and concerns about transparency and preserving government records after his administration began to delete posts made by his predecessor, Eric Adams, under the NYC mayor handle on X. However, Adams' post can be found in a public archive maintained by the city. As the State Department archives old posts, other agencies post extreme content. In isolation, the removal of State Department social media content is a minor change, unrelated to larger overhauls of American diplomacy and foreign policy, and the administration's widespread changes to the federal bureaucracy. But Trump's second term messaging strategy has been defined by a mindset that social media content is governing, and that governing is also achieved through content creation. The Department of Homeland Security, the Labor Department, and other federal government accounts have shared posts that contain white supremacist rhetoric and nods to conspiracy theories like QAnon. And Trump administration staffers frequently use X to spar with critics and post memes that support the president. On Friday, Trump faced uncharacteristic pushback, sharing a video on his social media after that contained false claims of election fraud and a short snippet of an unrelated video that contained a racist depiction of a former President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama as apes. The post was deleted after the White House initially defended it as an internet meme. They cured leprosy. Why do they still live in leprosy colonies? A doctor visits residents at the Barathon leprosy colony. Even though they are cured of the disease, they have long-term effects, crippled hands, blindness, and amputations, and most of all, foot lesions that, if untreated, can become infected. Alamelu, a gray-haired woman who wears a bright pink sari, and a gap-toothed smile, has lived in the Kalvari Nagar leprosy colony in India for 22 years, and another colony before that. Her family sent her away when she was only 12 years old, after she was diagnosed with what is most likely the world's most misunderstood and stigmatized disease. They feared her presence in the home would tarnish the family's reputation, and her siblings would never be married. Alamelu, who is now 75, never saw her family again. Like most residents of Kalvari Nagar, this woman was cured of leprosy years ago, but she has no plans to leave the colony. This is her home. On a recent Tuesday, Alamelu waited with 10 other colony residents to see a visiting doctor. They sat in white plastic chairs in a warehouse-like building, each holding a colored folder containing their medical files. NPR agreed to refer to residents of the leprosy colony by only their first names because of the stigma that surrounds the disease. Alamelu, now 75, was diagnosed with leprosy at age 12. Her family sent her to a colony, and she never saw them again. She was cured of leprosy years ago, but she has no plans to leave the colony. While these elderly residents no longer have leprosy, they still suffer from disabling long-term effects from the disease. Crippled hands, blindness, amputations, and most of all, foot lesions that never seem to heal. If untreated, these can lead to dangerous infections. Nurses and helpers bathe the patient's feet and remove dead tissue around the wounds to help them heal. They massage the patient's legs with oil to prevent future lesions and bandage the feet of those with the worst ulcers, some as big as a fist. The patients are given plastic bags with enough gauze, bandages, and ointment to care for their wounds between doctor's visits. although not everyone follows the advice. A nurse tends to foot wounds, a lasting effect of leprosy. The legacy of leprosy colonies. This colony in Tamil Nadu in southern India is one of about 750 leprosy colonies that still exist in India today. They are relics of a not too distant past, when those diagnosed with leprosy were exiled out of a mistaken fear they would spread disease and disabling disease. In fact, leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, is one of the least contagious diseases there is. 95% of humans are naturally immune, and it's not easily contracted by the other 5%. Today, leprosy is easily cured with antibiotics, especially if detected earlier. But the stigma that has haunted victims for centuries persists, has hindered reintegration of those who have had the disease and stymied global efforts to eliminate leprosy by discouraging affected individuals from seeking care. The World Health Organization says there are about 173,000 new cases of Hansen's disease reported in the world in 2024. Almost 60% of those cases were in India, although Brazil and Indonesia have sizable shares. A scene from the main street of the Kalavari Nagar leprosy colony. When people are diagnosed with leprosy in India today, they are usually treated at a government hospital and sent home to go on with their lives. But in decades past, victims were banished to colonies. Tens of thousands of former patients, their children and grandchildren, most of whom never had leprosy, still live there. They face the continued poverty and inadequate services, but either don't want to leave or have nowhere else to go. Alamalu's story is a common one. She was diagnosed after noticing she felt nothing when a heavy spindle hit her leg, and then again when ants were nibbling on her toes. Numbness is only an early symptom of the disease, in which bacteria attack the peripheral nerves. Today, the only visible sign Alamalu ever had leprosy on her clawed hands, the result of nerve damage and muscle atrophy. She says the stigma is not as bad as it used to be. But why would she leave the colony, and where would she go? She owns her house here, and 2 grown sons live with her. One is an electrician, and the other works in construction, earning enough to get by. Her neighbor Rabba feels much the same way. She has lived in colonies for 37 years. She bears a large open wound on her right foot and several missing toes. Rabba has lived in leprosy colonies for 37 years, where she is surrounded by friends and family. I can't go outside and live by myself, says Rabba. I'm okay here. Rabba worries she might not be accepted if she moved away. Here, she is surrounded by family and friends. Her son and his family, including 2 grandchildren, live with her in a house she owns. Many children who grew up in colonies have stayed or come back to care for their aging parents. Rabah takes out her smartphone and proudly shows pictures of her son, an electrical engineer with a multinational firm, and her daughter, a nurse who lives several hours away. I believe in God, and God will take care of me, she says. What is their life like? Conditions in the colonies have slowly improved in recent years as a result of government and nonprofit programs. In fact, it's difficult to distinguish some colonies from surrounding villages, with their narrow unpaved roads, modest concrete houses, and stray dogs. Construction workers build a new house at the Burthon colony. They do not live in a colony, and a decade ago would not have stepped foot inside of the mistaken fear that the disease is highly contagious. Their presence is a sign that the stigma of leprosy is easing in India. Rising Star Outreach, the nonprofit that provides medical care at Kalavari Nagar and dozens of other colonies, has helped upgrade infrastructure and services, such as the availability to clean water. The group also assists residents with microloans to set up small businesses and runs 2 boarding schools outside the colonies. There, hundreds of colony children, almost none of whom have ever had leprosy, can come for a better education than they would have likely received at local schools. But persistent prejudice remains an obstacle for colony residents. India has repealed laws that allowed, among other things, the segregation of leprosy patients and the use of the disease as grounds for divorce. Other than discriminatory laws remain on the books, including ones that restrict travel, employment, and access to services. We have come a long way, but there is still a long way to go, says Padma, a social activist in India who has worked for years to improve conditions for the leprosy affected. People are still afraid. The fear is there. Venka says the problem is especially acute in poorer regions of the country. Despite aggressive efforts by the government and nonprofits to dispel the myths about leprosy, she says many people still don't understand that the disease, believed to spread through droplets from the nose and mouth, is not easily contracted and can be cured. Employees of the Rising Star Outreach charitable group, which provides medical care and other services to leprosy colonies, make an open weave cot for a resident. The airflow in this type of bed helps protect wounds that linger long after the leprosy is cured. Only 2 years in Bihar, one of the country's poorest states, Rising Star Outreach took in a 10-year-old girl with leprosy after her family abandoned her. A social worker found her rummaging through the trash looking for food, says the group's founder, Becky Douglas. Even after the girl was taken to a hospital and cured, her family refused to let her back home. When they were finally persuaded to allow a month-long visit, they failed to care for the girl's wounds, which led to sepsis. And threatened amputation of her leg. Education is the key to changing attitudes, says Douglas. The purpose of her group's boarding schools is not only to lift colony children and their families out of poverty, but to wipe away the stereotypical image of leprosy, victims as repulsive and unclean. She says almost all of their graduates go to college and many become engineers, doctors, and nurses. If you think of a leprosy-affected person, as a person doing IT in your office or your doctor, that's very different than a man standing in the corner with pus dripping down his legs and open wounds, says Douglas. As they became successful, then the stigma can die. A teacher fights the stigma. Jennifer, a 24-year-old English teacher at the group school in Tamil Nadu, hopes to be one of those examples. She grew up in a nearby colony with her grandparents, who took her in after her parents abandoned her as a 7-month-old baby in a garbage dump. Her parents, who were splitting up, did not have leprosy, and neither did Jennifer. But growing up in the colony stigmatized her as if she had the disease. Jennifer is a teacher at a boarding school for children who have grown up in leprosy conditions. She was abandoned by her parents and grew up with her grandparents in the colony where they lived. Her goal now is to help children from the colonies to feel confident they can have successful lives. Jennifer came to the Rising Star Outreach School when she was 5 years old and continued there until she graduated and went off to college. She says a lot has changed since she was growing up in the colony, and her grandparents would take her to the railway station to beg. When I was very, very little, people didn't enter my home. She says outsiders would often refuse to speak with colony residents or eat their food. We are a marginalized people. Now, when Jennifer goes to visit her grandmother, she's struck by how people will visit from nearby villages, often asking her to help with their English. They might even ask for a glass of water or food. She thinks one reason for the change is that people see her and all she's accomplished and realize that she is not a threat. They see me with good hands, good skills, and good education. Even so, Jennifer did not tell her college friends where she grew up and asked that her full name not be used for this story because the stigma lingers. She believes if she hadn't gone to the boarding school, and she would likely still be in the colony and might have to beg to survive. She would almost certainly have been married off at a very young age to an older man, a common custom in the region. Her goal now is to help other children from the colonies feel confident. They too can have successful lives outside. I show them, here, you can be a better person. You too can do many things. You can do this. You can do that. She says, these kids have dreams. They think tomorrow will be safe for them.